Hello and welcome to Forever Sports. The future of rugby could be in danger with a breakaway league starting to gain more momentum, aiming at attracting the top 300 men and women rugby players to feature in a league that will take place in two separate windows and basically potentially sort of threaten to derail the entire current club system. And it is being backed with a lot of money and basically a whole franchise system that could be introduced with NFL teams being approached, for example, Red Bull potentially being keen on taking on teams of different franchises in a league that will basically take it sort of place around the world at sort of iconic destinations such as São Paulo stadiums, such as Camp Nou in Spain, for example, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and basically move away from a union or a club system and into a global franchise system in a similar sort of way to an IPL or LIV Golf. I mention those two because people involved in those deals are involved in this and could be a complete sort of game changer in terms of the way rugby currently works and could have massive ramifications for lots of different tournaments. Before we get into it, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Right, so this is what we know about it so far. So one of the main sort of drivers is this man over here, Mike Tindall, who is obviously a former World Cup winner and is very sort of frequently within different sort of rugby programs. He's also a member of the royal family, and he's one of the driving forces behind 360, which is apparently going to drive generational change in rugby. So according to the Telegraph Sport, they've got some of the details about this sort of revolutionary blueprint. And basically, the main people involved are Tindall himself, as well as former Bart director of rugby, Stuart Hooper, and the lawyer who helped create the IPL, as well as LIV Golf. The tournament will basically have two separate windows, April to June, as well as August to September, as part of the promise to make players available for internationals. Now, immediately, big red flags for Southern Hemisphere players because those are when you play internationals. August, September is the current window for the Rugby Championship. Now, as we move towards the global calendar, if something like this were to go ahead, you'd have to then realign the calendar for Rugby Championship and probably have it at a similar time, if not the same time, as the Six Nations. The idea is basically following a Formula One type of season, which will be a Grand Prix model of 12 franchises visiting 16 glamorous venues, which includes Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, the Nou Camp, and São Paulo. There have been multiple bids for franchises from team owners in other sports, including the NFL and Formula One. So, owners like I don't know, thinking of the Formula One, obviously all the car brands, but like sort of a Petronas, for example, can get involved. So some of the big owners, your Ineoses and the likes of that, could look at buying a rugby franchise as part of this. They said that heads of agreements signed with dozens of players, with the top 300 male and female players targeted. One of the big players is Ina Ma. She is the biggest rugby personality in the world. She's not necessarily the biggest person within the rugby world, but she's definitely the most prominent rugby player in the world in terms of the following and on the back of the Olympics, and one of the biggest rugby personalities out there. There will be no relegation, and apparently there are going to be laws to minimize dead time, maximizing fast-paced and non-stop action. Once again, this whole idea of dead time and matches taking too long and not having much being sort of floated as if that's the entire savior of rugby. Obviously, the big thing is the international window. So it says that with April to June or September, R360 explicitly wants to turn rugby into a summer sport and give the game its Super Bowl moment. And it is hoping to launch the competition in September 2026 and expand to 10 male franchises in its second year. Very worrying, I think, if you are the URC Pro, top 14, Premiership, Japan League, stuff like that, because this is something else to contend with. Now, the biggest problem, I think, with this is it's attractive from a player's point of view because there are salaries being touted as sort of kind of like $2 million type of thing, as kind of what some of the salaries are going to be. Now, if you are a Andre Pollard, now you're going to the Bulls next year, cool, you've been earning sort of 20 million rand, you're probably going to be earning less than that. You're now going to potentially be offered a 30, 40 million rand contract to go and play effectively 4 months of rugby. outside your Springbok window compared to your URC, which is September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. It's a 9-10 month period that you end up playing. So the biggest sort of threat about this tournament is that if you get the backing of the money, it makes sense from a player point of view because you're playing less rugby, earning a lot more, and you'll still be available for your nations. Now, Southern Hemisphere, this is going to become potentially very, very difficult. And I think you're going to see a lot of Australian players being targeted because I think Australian rugby is in a bit of a weird space at the moment. New Zealand, for example, this threatens the All Blacks in every single essence because at the moment, any All Black player that wanted to be involved would by default make themselves unavailable for selection. In terms of the Springboks point of view, we have to wait and see. In theory, if the right players start to go to this tournament, sorry, we'll have no choice but to basically say it's okay. We'll still kind of select them. Will this kind of replace your Japan, for example? Players going to Japan where you do play a little bit less rugby, potentially. But again, the windows don't lie because it was then mean that you wouldn't have your players available for August, June, or else they'd only be available for that sort of April, May, June period. So we're talking about 5 months versus 9 months. So it makes sense from a player's point of view. The money's going to make sense. I just don't see where you get the fan pull in immediately. I think that rugby fans are intrinsically quite tribalistic, and franchises are a difficult thing to really get behind. At the moment, I'm a Lions supporter because I grew up in Joburg, and you've got that sort of centerpiece part of the city, the likes of that, and that is very much intrinsic into all the various sort of your big teams. Your VIP, your Lekker Ding type of thing. It's ingrained in sort of a Western Province rugby culture to support the Stormers. The blue and white stripes, for example. The Hoopers, as a lot of people speak about. You talk about overseas. Your Irish teams, your English teams, very much teams of the city and places, and very geographic in the way that they are portrayed. You now have to try and sell franchise. Now, if you do get the best players in the world, like IPL, for example, you've got, a very big fan base. But, IPL, especially I think these days, has become a league where I don't think you've got that, your non-Indian supporters that have that kind of complete dedication to a team. So you've got to find that global audience. The IPL works because you've got a dedicated 1 billion audience and even a lot of Pakistani people and you've got all the whole betting stats out of it. So you've got a massive audience there. They don't actually really need the international audience because they've got a big enough local audience. The biggest challenge to a league like this is where do you get that audience? How do you entice a South African audience, which is one of the biggest rugby audiences out there? How do you entice the French audience, which is very, very tribalistic in terms of very pro-French, and they get behind the top 14? And I don't think they really care about other competitions. So that, I think, is going to be their biggest challenge. If you bring in the biggest players, there'll be a lot of piqued interest. But you're going to have to, there's a lot of, I think, for me, obstacles you're going to have to try and get around to try and make this a success. Similarly, for example, time zones. Rugby is a very big global game. Now, are you going to be, this will probably be aligned to sort of more European time zones because you can get the South African audience, French audience, Irish audience, etc., etc. But then how do you get your New Zealand audience? How do you get the Australia audience? How do you get the Japanese sort of audience into this? I think it's a nice thing in terms of potentially could grow like in South America, for example, a North America type of program. But it's very interesting. Now, the main thing I said is this threatens because at the end of the day, if you've got your best players not playing for URC and the likes of that, these leagues will be watered down. And the biggest problem comes, how do we produce our players if we've got watered down leagues where our best players, go and play in this franchise? How do players get there? Sashvan Magomazulu, for example, he'd probably be offered lots of money to go there. How do you find the next Sashvan Magomazulu if you don't have a URC, a Curry Cup, and the likes of that to bring these players through? So lots of obstacles. Very interesting to see what happens. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve, and I'll chat to you soon.